Assalamu alaikum everyone. Welcome to another video for the LUMUN Model United Nations training platform. Today we're doing something slightly different and we have a very special guest with us, Ahmed Shiwani. He's a LUMUN alumni. In the past few LUMUN conferences at LUMUN 16, he was chairing Kenyatta's cabinet. In LUMUN 15, he was chairing the Afghan Revolutionary Council, both single crisis committees, both like two of LUMUN's most iconic committees in recent years. So I'm sure that for anyone who's interested in crisis committees, whether that's for the upcoming LUMUN conference or just generally, this will be an extremely useful video, and we're going to try and cover almost all of the sort of different aspects that are part of a crisis committee. All right, Shivani, so let's get into it. So first question that I'm going to ask just to sort of set the scene here is that what do you think are some of the most common mistakes that delegates tend to make in a crisis committee in your experience, and how can they be avoided?
I think that's a good question because there's certain very simple mistakes that delegates tend to make that just make their life harder in the committee. And I think the three main mistakes I've seen. The first is that delegates think that because it's a crisis committee, they can get away with not researching, and that often backfires. I mean, you can be a very good crisis delegate, but if you're not well researched, you're not going to be able to respond well to the crises at hand. And generally, what I've seen is that uh, delegates who are better researched are able to maneuver situations to their advantage because they know some details about what's going on, right? So if they get a certain crisis that's a little bit technical or has some historical context, a delegate who's well researched will know what who the main players are in the crisis. They'll know what actually happened, and they'll know all of the different scenarios that can play out, as compared to another delegate who might be very good at crises, but just because they don't have that sort of context, they might not be able to maneuver it well. So I think the one major mistake delegates make is that they don't research enough. And I think the second major mistake that delegates make is that they don't enter the committee with certain objectives in mind. Like when they start a session or when they're participating in a crisis committee, they don't come in with a certain set of goals or objectives. So they just go with what's going on in the committee. They try to respond to individual crises, but they don't see everything in the big picture, and that also sort of affects their performance, because that means that while they might be able to respond to certain crises well, they're not going to play a major role in the narrative that develops throughout the 4 or 5 days, just because they don't have a set of objectives in mind, right? So they'll be there here and there, but they're not going to be uh, defining the role or defining the trajectory of the committee. So I think that's the second mistake that they make. And again, the solution to that is to think about what objectives you as your particular personality should have when you go to the crisis committee, and then try to work towards achieving them. And that means you have to research well, you have to think about your portfolio powers, you have to think about what the historical context of the committee is, and then you have to try to maneuver crises and other situations to suit your objectives or to meet them. And I think the third mistake they make is that delegates tend not to understand what the chair wants, or what the chair is thinking. They don't make an attempt to read what the chair wants to achieve, or just how the chair perceives a certain situations, which then means that they might be doing something well and they might be working really hard to sort of get to a certain objective, but if it's not what the chair wants, it's not going to make a huge difference in terms of whether or not they get an award, right? And at the end of the day, the chair will decide your award. And if they don't, if they're not happy with your performance, they're not going to give you an award. Or if they don't think you did a good job, they're not going to give you an award. So they have to sort of really think about all of the things that the chair wants to see in a delegate. And I know this is very generic and it can apply to like other like committees as well, but if you're able to sort of understand exactly what the chair likes or what are the things that they look for in a delegate, it'll make your life really easy, because then you have to just display those sort of characteristics. Like I've had some chairs who really like good speeches, and some chairs who don't care about good speeches, right? So then if I know that a chair doesn't really care about how eloquent I am, then I'm going to focus less on that and more on other aspects. So I think those are the three major mistakes that they make. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's those are some very, very good points. And I think that ties in with the other questions that we also have planned here. So the next question I want to ask is just something that you just mentioned right now is with regards to research. And that's obviously very important in MUNs generally. We've also done a video on how to research for MUN committees in general. But what is specific about researching for a crisis committee, and what's some advice that you can give specifically for
Mm,
delegates who are coming to a crisis committee? How should they approach it once they have the study guide in front of them? What should they do up till the conference?
mm. I think with research for a crisis committee is slightly different, right? For a regular committee, you have to do two things. You have to research on the content, and you have to research more or less on your own stance. And then that's about it. I mean, there are only minor things that you have to research for otherwise. For a crisis committee, there are three main aspects. The first is obviously the content, right? If it's a historical committee, and often I think in Lumen we do have historical committees. If it's a historical committee, then you need to be very well aware of all of the events that have led up to the situation that you're in, right? So if your crisis is situated in, say, 1950, you need to know what happened in the past 5 years, right? Because if you have that sort of context, any sort of situation that comes up, you'll know what the context behind that crisis is. And if you're well researched on the past 5 years, you're going to be very well equipped to respond to any problem that you're given. So I think the first thing you need to do is, like, obviously research on the content, and specifically research on all of the things that led up to the situation that you're in. So try to develop a timeline of sorts where, if your crisis situation in 1950, then all of the events that happened between 1945 and 1950, so that you're very well aware of all of the different things that took place, and then you can respond well to a crisis. The other important thing is to research on individual personalities. And that means not just reading your own portfolio powers, but also reading the portfolio powers of every other delegate in the committee and seeing what role they have to play, right? Because if you know what role they have to play, then you can use it to your advantage, right? If you know that a certain delegate can help you achieve a certain goal or solve the crisis, only then will you be able to use their powers to your advantage. So if you haven't researched on the role of other delegates, then you're not going to be able to sort of use their powers to your advantage. And I think the third thing that delegates don't do is they don't read the ROPs well enough. So they don't know what the different rules of procedure are, and because crisis rules of procedure are often different from like regular rules of procedure, if you have a good grasp of it, it will first and foremost impress the chair, because the chair has probably spent a lot of time, coming up with these rules of procedure, right? So if they see their delegate is very well researched and very adept at all the different rules of procedure, they'll be impressed. And then the second is you can then again use those things to your advantage. So I mean the objective in a crisis should be that you should have as many tools as possible to solve a crisis, or to achieve a certain objective. And that means, just not just content, but also awareness of other delegates, also awareness of how the committee is functioning, and what possible scenarios in the future will be. I mean, all of that will contribute to the tools that you have at your disposal when a crisis is at hand. So I think those are the tips I would have for research.
All right. Okay. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. All right. So now you've researched for the committee, you are well prepared, and you go into the room, you get a crisis update, whether that's on the first day or even in the middle of the conference when you're getting updates. What do you think is the thought process that delegates need to employ when they're trying to tackle a crisis update, when they're thinking about making their speeches, writing their directives? Is there any specific thought process? And if so, what is that?
I mean, I think it will obviously always depend on the kind of crisis that you're given, and your position at that point. Whether you're doing well or you're not doing well. It's going to depend on that. But if I were to give it a structure, I think it would be that. So I'll try to give you some examples as well. I've seen that most delegates, as soon as they get a crisis, they start writing a directive. That's probably not the best way to go about it, right? I've seen that the people who have the best directives are delegates who take a step back and think about what they want to achieve out of that crisis. Um, and if they have that objective clear, then it's easier for them to sort of think about what steps they should take. So I think the first thing would be to think about what they want to achieve out of the crisis, and that can be various things, right? If their objective is to solve the problem at hand, that's one objective. If their objective is something else, to use this crisis to achieve a personal agenda of sorts, then they should have that very clear in their heads. Okay, this is where I care less about solving the problem at hand and more about using the problem to sort of boost my own agenda. And once they have that clear, then they should start thinking about all of the tools that they have at their disposal to sort of achieve that objective, right? So, relationships that they've made in the past, or delegates whose support they already have, or certain, certain portfolio powers that they have, or certain research or content that they know that other delegates don't know. And then when they have all of those tools and a clear objective, it's going to be very easy for them to come up with a certain strategy, right? Um, so I think those would be the two main steps that they should take. Is first think about what objectives they want to achieve, and then second think about all of the tools that they have to achieve those objectives. And I think as a third step, if they have time, think about all of the things that could go wrong, um, when they're trying to adopt a certain strategy, right? So, for example, say, okay, I want to assassinate someone, and that's my solution. What are the things that will stop me, or what are the things that will uh, be a roadblock to sort of achieving that objective, and then plan for those or think about ways around those problems. So the more planning you do before you start solving the problem, the better prepared you will be, because I guarantee you about 80% of the delegates in the committee will not think about all of those things, right? So you're already on a plane above them because you've just thought about all of the things that could happen and all of the things that you can do to solve those problems. So you're already 2 steps ahead of them, and then you can sort of use that to achieve your goals. So again, think about your objectives, think about the tools that you have at your disposable, and finally think about all of the things that could stop you from achieving your goals. So that's what the three things they should think about are.
Fair, fair. So over here, so we're getting into now sort of the documentation part of a crisis committee, which is exceptionally important. So I just
Hmm.
want to ask that what do you think are some of the elements that are sort of necessary for a good directive? Let's say
Hmm.
let's take a private directive. What do you think are some of the components that make a good private directive that's likely to stand out in the mind of the chair and that's likely to get accepted and then sort of forward the agenda that that particular delegate has?
Hmm. That's a difficult question to answer. But I would say that there's the fine line between not enough detail and too much detail. Like, I'll give you an example. I remember on like this was last year at Lumen, and like on the fourth day, this kid came with like a 5-page directive in the morning, and I just rejected it because I'm like, I'm not going to read this. I'm not going to spend 15 minutes reading your directive. I want to know exactly what you want to do, and it doesn't need to be 5 pages. You don't need to tell me. You don't need to tell this one person कि you आपने सुबह 8:30 पे इसको ये letter देना है. You don't need that much detail, right? And often I've also rejected directives because they don't have any detail at all. So I think the first thing would be to be specific in terms of what things you want to do are, what all the things you want to do are, but at the same time not wasting too much time in like useless details, right? So a chair will want to know exactly how to execute your goal or execute what you want to do, and at the same time he wants to make sure, or she wants to make sure that it's realistic. So I would say, if I were to sort of give you two or three like main things you should focus on, is that they need to be realistic. So you can't just say, bomb this country and throw a new like drop a nuclear bomb at X country. That's not realistic. um, it needs to have enough detail for it to be executable, but not too much like useless detail, right? And third, it needs to again be written in a manner that's understandable, because often when you're in a hurry you don't even use full sentences, right? And that might be just a very minor reason your directive is rejected. It might be a very good idea, but just because you haven't phrased it well, you haven't used full sentences, or you haven't explained properly what you want to do, they might get rejected. And I think one thing I would say here is that if a directive does get rejected, it's not a big deal, right? Often, like, most chairs will be okay with you sending in a lot of directives. So don't worry if a directive gets rejected, but think about why it got rejected so that you don't make the same mistake next time. And I think it's always going to vary by chair, um, of why a directive gets rejected. So sort of think about or reflect upon why your directives were getting rejected and just don't make those mistakes again. I mean, I think it's an iterative process. You should make sure that by the second day or the third day, your directives aren't getting rejected. But if in the first day your directives are getting rejected, the chair is probably trying to teach you what not to do. So that would be my advice for directives.
All right. Yeah, that definitely makes a lot of sense. So, sort of tying into that, the next question I want to ask is another aspect of Model UN in general, and then also crisis committees that are particularly important. That is unmods and diplomacy. And we know
Yeah.
that unmods in crisis committees, there is perhaps a perception that they tend to get more heated, they're more intense, you have smaller number of people, they're more dynamic in ways. So, how do you think that delegates should approach unmodding in a crisis committee? What are some of the things that they should keep in mind? And particularly also in line with the Lumen spirit and the things that we espouse at the Lumen conference. What are some of the points that you want to make here?
Hmm. Um, what I would say here is that, look, if a delegate feels threatened by you, or if they feel like, they're in competition with you, they will always be a little harsh, right? They're not going to be all nice and bubbly with you. Um, so I think the first step that delegates need to take in crisis committees is to first figure out what motivates the other delegate, or what the other delegate wants, what their objectives are, and how they can sort of collaborate or align um, the objective of the other delegate with their objectives. And if the person on the other side feels like, there's a collective win in trying to achieve whatever you want to achieve, they'll be very likely to do it. They're not gonna, get annoyed by you. They're not gonna be angry at you. They're not gonna start yelling or refuse to talk to you. And I think what because crisis committees can get stressful, and people, are really worried about, how, whether or not they'll be able to achieve a certain objective. We don't think about those things, right? So this needs to be a deliberate effort to think about exactly what other people in the room want. And if you know what they want, um, then you should work towards thinking about how you can align those objectives. Often a lot of delegates think that, being diplomatic, or uh, just being nice to other delegates is at odds with what they want to achieve. And it's not, because you will never be in a position where you can achieve your objectives without the support of other delegates, right? And the more support you have, the better you will be able to perform in the committee, right? So it's not at odds with your performance. At the end of the day, you want to win, and so does the other delegate, right? But there can be collective wins, and you can have collective shared goals, and it will be self motivated. You'll be working in self interest, and the other delegate will be working in self interest. But if you can sort of align everyone's interests, or at least a few people's interests, you're more likely for them to listen to you and agree to what you want to say. So I think in terms of unmods and general diplomacy, specifically in crisis committees, where where every delegate is very self-interested, think about aligning goals and aligning targets and collective wins. And that will go a very long way. But it needs to be a deliberate effort. It can't just be a whiff. It can't just be like, okay, you want this and I want this. Go when you go home after your sessions, think about what other delegates want, think about what they're trying to achieve, and then think about how you can convince them that your goals and their goals are similar or can be achieved together.
That definitely makes a lot of sense. And even in my experience, I think that that's something that a lot of delegates don't consider in terms of unmod strategy. So yeah, that's definitely some very, very good advice. So just to now like cap this entire thing off, I want to ask a question that with regards to your performance in a committee, we've talked about a lot of different elements that go into a crisis committee. We've talked about directives, unmods, speaking, etc. But when a delegate is in a crisis committee, how can they gauge their performance? How do they know how well they're doing in a crisis committee during the conference?
Hmm. Um, I would say that. So this will tie into my first answer, which is that you need to think about how you can play a role in the narrative that's building, right? A chair and the chair and the dais will have a certain start point and an end point to the committee. And the more input you have in that story, the better you'll perform, or the more likely you are to win an award, right? And so I think the way to gauge, the simple way to gauge how well you're doing is to see how much input you have in the story that's developing, right? That doesn't mean that you have to solve every crisis that you get, or it doesn't mean that you're the person who has the most people in their block, or if you're the leader of the block. You can be someone who's not the block leader, you can be someone who's not solved every single crisis, but if you are the person that has dictated the story, or dictated where the committee is gone, in terms of, its storyline, then you have a very good chance of winning. um, and that sort of ties into real life as well, right? You remember that the people that defined the key decisions, or defined the direction of a certain, certain political problem or certain social problem. So you have to be that person, you have to be the one that defines direction. And that also means that every day you have to think about where the committee is gone, where it started in the morning and where it is in the evening, and what you can do to sort of to sort of define what happens the next day, right? So I think that's a good way of gauging it, to see how much role you have in the overall story of the committee.
All right. Yeah. So I think we've covered a lot of things and we've talked about. So I think that all of the things that we've talked about then tie into the end goal in any MUN committee, that is like perception and impact. So do you think there's anything particularly something unique to note about how you want to stand out at the end of the day? Like how do you want to be memorable at the end of the day? Because that is what the bottom line is at most model UN
Hmm.
conferences that you will attend.
I think with crisis committees, it's a little different. Like, I mean, with other committees, if you're someone who's sort of, the filter between other people in an unmod, or if you're giving really good speeches, you'll be memorable. With the crisis committee, I think the best way to stand out is to be the person that's thinking ahead, right? So if you can think ahead, um, in a certain situation, in a given crisis, or if you can think about what's going to happen next, and if you spend time thinking about what's going to happen next, you will stand out. The people I've given awards to in the times that I've chaired crises are people who've been two steps ahead of the committee, and sometimes two steps ahead of the dais, right? So they know what the dais is thinking, or they know what the dais is going to do next, and they're planning in advance. I'll give you a very simple example. In one of the crises that we simulated, um, like we were in this room, in this city. So we were in the parliament, and then these forces were coming towards the parliament. They were marching towards it, right? And most delegates were thinking about how to stop them from uh, coming towards the parliament and sort of attacking us. One delegate was thinking about their escape plan if they get to the parliament, right? So they were thinking about how they would escape if those forces were to get to the parliament, and they were thinking less about actually stopping them, right? So in their head, what they were thinking is, this the chair has thought of this huge crisis where these people are marching to the parliament. They'll probably get to the parliament at some point, so I need to think of an exit strategy, right? And when they actually got to the parliament, that delegate was able to escape. Um, and and so because they had thought ahead, they were able to respond to what would happen in the future, and then they were the person that got the award in my committee. So I think just, if you will stand out, if you're thinking in advance, and the chair will know, reading your directives and listening to your speeches, that you are the one thinking in advance, or you're the one thinking about what's going to happen next. So I think that would be one piece of advice for being memorable, or standing out in a crisis.
All right, all right. Yeah, that's a wonderful example, and I think that's really nicely caps off the session as well. So yeah, thank you so much, Vani, for doing this. Thank you so much for everyone who's watched till now. And we hope this was very useful in terms of crisis committees at Lumen, but also generally as well. And we'll see you soon, shortly, with more videos on the channel. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.